This is a new ministry which is just starting. Reverend Hood needs your help in sharing the good news of Jesus Christ and His power throughout the world. If you would be so kind as to send a donation to Nicholas Hood III Ministries of any amount, Reverend Hood will send you a free, complimentary copy of his book of original personal prayers and beautiful photographs entitled The Test, The Strength, The Endurance, and The Way Out. We appreciate your support, and in this way, you can partner with Reverend Hood in sharing the good news of Jesus throughout the world. Please make your check out to Nicholas Hood III Ministries and mail it to 4535 Chrysler Drive, Detroit, Michigan, 48201.
You know why I really love Nick Hood as a minister? I watched his father do it, and he took over for the church, and he was one of us, but he really turned out to be a great minister. I know it's hard, and that's something that I know that all ministers may not be doing what they're doing because for the right reasons, but I know it's hard. I know he's a beautiful man, and we've been knowing each other for over 50 years. I believe in him. He's inspired me in so many ways to do what I'm doing and try to be the best at it. Make sure you watch Nick Hood's Ministries. You'll never be the same.
Welcome to Nick Hood Ministries. I'm Nick Hood, pastor of the Plymouth United Church of Christ, located in the heart of Detroit, and as I like to say, the very tip top of the medical center area of Detroit. And we are praising God today. Today in this program, I want to talk about a simple theme: faith in the midst of the storm. I can tell over the last several weeks, people calling me on the 1-800 number that's on the screen right now, in many cases are going through storms, the storms of life. And today I'll be talking with two very esteemed people, Dr. Crystal Woods Olier, who is a licensed psychologist, trained psychologist. She's a supervisor of psychologists and social workers in the Detroit area for a company that's national, but also the Reverend David Nunn Telford. And interesting thing about the two of these, and even me, all three of us went to Yale. David and I did the Yale Divinity School, but we're separated about 40 years. And Crystal Woods Olier, who to me is a relatively recent graduate from Yale College. And we'll be back in just a moment, but I want you to think about the storms of life and ask yourself, what storms have I gone through? What storms am I going through? And to what degree has the Lord helped me with the storms of my life? We'll be right back.
This is a new ministry which is just starting. Reverend Hood needs your help in sharing the good news of Jesus Christ and His power throughout the world. If you would be so kind as to send a donation to Nicholas Hood III Ministries of any amount, Reverend Hood will send you a free, complimentary copy of his book of original personal prayers and beautiful photographs entitled The Test, The Strength, The Endurance, and The Way Out. We appreciate your support, and in this way, you can partner with Reverend Hood in sharing the good news of Jesus throughout the world. Please make your check out to Nicholas Hood III Ministries and mail it to 4535 Chrysler Drive, Detroit, Michigan, 48201.
Again, this is Pastor Nick Hood, and today I'm with Dr. Crystal Woods Olier and Dr. Crystal Woods Olier and the Reverend David Nunn Telford. And I've asked them to help think through the question, how do we help people who are going through the storms of life? And Dr. Crystal Woods-Olier, what's your first thought? You're a psychologist.
I am.
From a psychological standpoint, how would you help a person think through dealing with the storms of life?
So yes, honestly, as a psychologist and a psychotherapist, I have the pleasure each day to meet with people that are literally going through the storms of life. That's how they end up at my doorstep.
Now, what's the difference between a psychologist and a psychotherapist?
Yes.
Therapist.
And so one is broader. A psychologist can do a lot of different things. A psychologist can be a researcher, can be a professor, can be a teacher. There are also all types of psychology: social psychology, ecological community psychology, evolutionary psychology. But one, in that underneath that large umbrella of psychology, there are those that work as therapists, as psychotherapists. And that is mainly what I'm doing now, along with an administrative role. So I get to meet with about 20 different people each week that came to me because they are in the midst of a storm. And sometimes when people hear that I'm a therapist, they may say like, oh, isn't that sad listening, to people's worst day or listening to people's problems. Honestly, it is amazingly inspiring, because even though they are in the midst of that storm, the reason why they came to me is because they do have hope. They have hope that something can move, that something can change for them. And they even somehow have hope that I might be able to be a part of that change, be a part of that positive change.
And that's got to be humbling.
Yes, it is. It really is. And that is why I absolutely love the work that I do, because I get to sit down with people and think through, okay, we're in a really tough spot right now. Let's first think of some ways to maybe cope with the literal symptoms of depression, of anxiety that you are currently facing. But let's also think about, why is this coming up for you now? Are there some life situations that you are currently in that are causing this depression or this anxiety? Are there some changes that you really want to make in your life because you feel like you are not living the life you want? Or in the case of suicide, suicidal thoughts, maybe you literally feel like your life is not worth living. So then we need to, even if we're talking about, okay, how does deep breathing, how does one cope with anxiety and capture negative thoughts as they're coming in, but also literally, how do we create a life for you? How do we create a daily life and structure that feels fulfilling, that feels satisfying?
And so I don't forget to ask you this question at the end of the interview. What's the name of your agency? It's Life Stance, correct?
Yes, Life Stance Health. It is a national organization, and we definitely have multiple clinics here in Michigan. I am at our Southfield clinic, and I get to meet with amazing clients, and I get to supervise some absolutely amazing therapists. So I love the work that I'm doing.
If a person looking at this is from around the country, and we do have a national audience, they could call, I guess, look online or look up where Life Stance is located in their area?
Yes, they can Google Life Stance Health. So Life Stance is all one word, LIFESTANCE Health. And you can look out on Google, look up Life Stance Health, and you can search for a therapist and a clinic in your area. You can just put in your state, your city, your zip code, and they have therapists there waiting to meet with you.
All right. We're also joined by the Reverend David Nunn Telford. And Reverend David Nunn Telford, give me some biblical thoughts and spiritual thoughts on this question before us today. How do we help a person who feels like they're just backed up against the wall?
Yeah, it is a question that a lot of us face in life, right? One of the things that immediately comes to mind as I hear us talking about it is Jesus, and one of the moments that Jesus faces a particular turbulent storm. And it is when Jesus is fasting in the desert for 40 days and 40 nights and is tempted by Satan, by the devil. And what does Jesus do? Jesus begins to quote, I didn't realize this growing up, but Jesus begins to quote passages from Deuteronomy. Mm-hmm. And when you go back to Deuteronomy, there is a mandate from parents to instill words into their children. So one generation passes on words to like the next generation. And when Jesus finds himself as an adult in a tough spot, he begins to call upon the words of the generations like before. Mm. And I think that one of the things that it teaches us is that we often have strength that is passed on to us by those who have been through things. And we can call upon that in times when we're going through storms, right? Sometimes it's what your grandmama told you, right? Or what mama told you, or maybe your best friend, right? In this day and age, maybe it was a tweet you saw or a TikTok video, right? There are words that people can often feed into our spirit that sometimes when we don't have it, right? I ain't got it today, right? But someone who does have it or did have it spoke it into me. And I think that that's one thing that we can sometimes call upon when we're in a tough spot. But what I don't want to do is to pretend like all of us have healthy relationships with our families, right? So maybe you didn't have words of life that were spoken to you. I'm reminded of Peter. Peter denies Jesus 3 times. Mm-hmm. Jesus comes back, and Peter is not only grieving Jesus's death and his murder, but then has to deal with the guilt of having denied Jesus 3 times. And Jesus comes and has breakfast with Peter, and they have this long talk because they got to talk it out, right? To me, that lets me know that navigating the storm is not a perfect linear process. Like, I'm so happy that you're here because I can only imagine in your role that not every session goes perfectly.
That is true.
Sometimes you make a step forward and then you take a step back. But what I love about that passage is that Jesus doesn't abandon Peter because Peter wasn't perfect. God doesn't abandon us because we are imperfect. So navigating turbulent times and finding faith, it's not gonna look the same for everyone, and it certainly is not something that you have to feel like you have to get right all at once.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and in navigating the turbulent waters, just to go back to Peter denying Jesus 3 times, to make it even worse, John, the disciple John, is inside the courtyard of Caiaphas. When Peter is on the outside, it's John on the inside saying, you can come in. And Peter on the outside saying, I know the man not. And Peter has to live with that. You know, John is the eyewitness that Peter denied Jesus 3 times. Friends, we're going to bring this first segment to a close. I want you to stick around because when I come back with Dr. Crystal Woods-Ollier and Reverend David Nunn Telford, we're going to talk a little bit more specifically about what you and I can do, what we can do when we find ourselves in the most difficult moments of life and how the Lord can see us through. Stick around. We'll be right back.
This is a new ministry which is just starting. Reverend Hood needs your help in sharing the good news of Jesus Christ and his power throughout the world. If you would be so kind as to send a donation to Nicholas Hood III Ministries of any amount, Reverend Hood will send you a free complimentary copy of his book of original personal prayers and beautiful photographs entitled The Test, The Strength, The Endurance, and The Way Out. We appreciate your support, and in this way, you can partner with Reverend Hood in sharing the good news of Jesus throughout the world. Please make your check out to Nicholas Hood III Ministries and mail it to 4535 Chrysler Drive, Detroit, Michigan 48201.
There are people all across this globe who now will have the opportunity to know you like I do, because of course you are very forthcoming in telling stories about life, stories that are relatable, and that means something. How wonderful it is, and I just look forward to seeing how this platform, this new platform, will just rise and grow and really be a vessel through which you can be a blessing to folk all over this world, and Lord knows we need it.
Again, this is Pastor Nick Hood, and we're talking about faith when you're in a tough spot. And I'm joined today by Dr. Crystal Woods Olier, who's a psychologist, and also the Reverend David Nunn Telford, a dynamic minister. And Dr. Crystal Woods Olier, I'm just curious, from your perspective, what are some of the baseline things an individual can do if they find themselves in a stressful moment of life? What suggestions would you give them?
I think firstly, I would think about taking care of the needs of the moment. And so, it's fairly open, a stressful time. That could mean, okay, you're dealing with a number of tasks at work, or that could mean that you're actually living in a war zone. And so you have to take care of the needs of the moment, give yourself grace in the areas you would need to kind of prioritize your resources in that moment. And then kind of after that stressful period, or after the actual stressor has lifted, which is usually when I'm meeting with people, it's then figuring out, okay, what do we do now? How did we cope with that time, with that really, really tough time in the moment? Because usually our minds and bodies are naturally going to try to focus on survival in that period, especially with something really traumatic. And so sometimes, though, those coping skills that we use during the trauma, we can then start to use even after that trauma has ended. And they are usually not good coping methods for these later experiences. An example would be the trauma of an assault. And so I've heard, described to me, sometimes people will dissociate. They'll actually kind of take themselves out of their body during that moment. Because again, their mind and body have been, confronted with something so traumatic, it's just trying to survive. So that may be what they needed to do in that moment, to literally take themselves out of their body and distance themselves from this thing that is happening. It becomes
now this is after the assault.
Yeah, so that's during.
Oh, during the assault.
Is that, yes.
Okay.
And so it's during the assault. Some people will describe dissociating. And that can look a lot of different ways. Sometimes it can look like literally feeling like you are outside of yourself, watching yourself go through the motions of this. It can feel like reality doesn't look the way it normally does, like things don't look the right colors or shapes, just because their mind is trying to encapsulate, trying to protect itself in that moment. The issue that sometimes comes up, though, is that later in life, potentially years after that traumatic experience, sometimes people will still be engaging in dissociation. And so it's kind of identifying what are the coping methods you used at that time. Are you still using them, some of them right now? Is that adaptive? Is that serving you well? And if not, what is the toolbox we need for the current issues of life?
Okay. Mm-hmm. Reverend David Nunn Telford, from a biblical and theological standpoint, what advice would you give our viewers today?
Yeah, it's a great question, Dr. Hood, and for me, one of the first things that comes up in terms of a concrete recommendation, it would be to look to the season that we're in the life of the church. At the time that we're recording this, it's Eastertide, and that means that we are focusing on this moment of resurrection. And there are very few moments in the wake of the resurrection where you find people grieving and trying to understand what's happening all on their own. They are usually surrounded by other people, right? The women are showing up to anoint Jesus's body in a group. People are locked up in the upper room in a group. Those who are traveling on the road of Emmaus, it's at least two people that Jesus runs into. And I think that when we're going through a difficult time, I'll put myself on blast. I try to isolate myself. Right? Because I think that I'm the only one going through this, or it's maybe embarrassing to admit what I'm going through. And the more that I live life, and the biblical testimony, it's probably why these texts exist, is that like they tell the story of people who link themselves to other people so that they are reminded that they are not traveling through life alone. And so to the degree that we can find people to talk to, they may not be on the level of a psychotherapist, but just someone who you can at least let in, that you can trust, so that you can be reminded that you're not going through life alone. I think that is tremendously important and can pull you out of some really difficult moments.
I want to share a personal story with you all. To me, life is full of stories. But Crystal, you may be able to relate to this even better because your husband has been in politics. But at one point, I stepped down from the Detroit City Council, ran for mayor, and I lost. And I ended up the election with $80,000 worth of debt. If you can imagine that. That's, to me, is a lot of money. So I went to one of the rich guys out in Grosse Pointe who had supported me, he was kind of a leader of a group of Grosse Pointe and suburban Detroit business people. And I asked him if they could help me raise money to pay off my debt. And the guy looked at me, he said, I suggest you go to the elders of your church and talk to them. And I'm saying to myself, man, that's the last thing I want to do because, the elders of my church, I don't think were that particular about me getting in that campaign anyway. And so what did I do? I started praying. I didn't even wait to go home to pray. I prayed in the car going home. And then the next day, I got on the telephone and I called each of the creditors, each of the people that I owe this $80,000 to. And I asked them for one thing. I said, I'm asking you to give me time to pay off this debt. And number two, I'm giving you my personal commitment that I will pay it off. I say, I live in Detroit. I can't go anywhere. And what I did not tell them was I had one son in college and I had another one getting ready to go into college. And then to have $80,000 worth of debt. And the college they were going to was $40,000 a year. But I just prayed to the Lord, and it was amazing. Not one of the creditors slammed the door in my face. Not one of those creditors took me to court. Matter of fact, it was almost like a love fest. And some of them told me, they say, this is the most unusual thing in the world, that a politician with debt would come to you and make a personal commitment that they would repay it. And you know something? I look back on that, it's like on a blip on the screen. And I didn't go to Belle Isle. Reverend Nunn Telford, you may not know about Belle Isle. I told you earlier, that's where I baptize people. But it sits in the middle of the Detroit River. A lot of people who are thinking about going crazy go to Belle Isle and they just sit. And I said, I didn't go to Belle Isle. I didn't jump off the bridge. I just prayed to the Lord and then asked the Lord for guidance and how to figure a way out. Dr. Woods, Olier, give me a couple more thoughts that you might have specifically that can help a person to get their life together when they're at their wits' end.
I think I hear what both of you are talking about is coping in a way of approaching whatever the stressor or the issue is versus avoidance. And so, avoidance would be that isolation. Avoidance would be you putting your head underneath the covers and avoiding having to address this financial stressor, this huge financial issue. Instead, you approach the problem. You're like, okay, this is the issue. I am going to, one, try to seek to rectify. Let's see if I can get some funds from these different places. Let me act. They were also probably surprised you called them.
They were absolutely surprised.
They are used to stalking their debtors, but the idea that you reach out to them and that you face it head on, same as saying, okay, this is an issue I'm having. I'm going to be vulnerable enough to seek out people that I'm close to seek out maybe people who are going through a similar thing, and so actually walking towards the issue, the stressor, the problem, versus, being completely hands off and putting your head in your turtle shell.
Mm-hmm. Reverend David Nunn Telford, we're about a minute left, but any closing thoughts?
Yeah, one thing that came up for me as you were talking is, I think part of what it takes to kind of like move towards the stressor and not isolate yourself or not run away from it is invigorating other parts of your life, right? So I want to encourage folks to think about what makes you come alive, what brings you joy, because just because you're going through a storm does not mean you don't deserve to have happiness. It doesn't mean that you don't, deserve to have joy. So make sure that you double down on that as well.
Reverend David Nunn Telford and Dr. Crystal Woods Ollier, thank you so much for being part of this. And I want to thank those who are looking at this program today. This is a new ministry, but the Lord is blessing us. And every week I receive a blessing. And just the fact that you are looking at this program today is a blessing to me. I want you to know I'm praying for you. God bless, God keep you. And until we meet again, I'm praying for you.
This is a new ministry which is just starting. Reverend Hood needs your help in sharing the good news of Jesus Christ and his power throughout the world. If you would be so kind as to send a donation to Nicholas Hood III Ministries of any amount, Reverend Hood will send you a free complimentary copy of his book of original personal prayers and beautiful photographs entitled The Test, The Strength, The Endurance, and The Way Out. We appreciate your support, and in this way, you can partner with Reverend Hood in sharing the good news of Jesus throughout the world. Please make your check out to Nicholas Hood III Ministries and mail it to 4535 Chrysler Drive, Detroit, Michigan, 48201.
There are people all across this globe who now will have the opportunity to know you like I do, because of course you are very forthcoming in telling stories about life, stories that are relatable, and that means something. How wonderful it is, and I just look forward to seeing how this platform, this new platform, will just rise and grow and really be a vessel through which you can be a blessing to folk all over this world, and Lord knows we need it.